Hi, I'm Naisha McCauley, and you're watching AccessTV.org.
Good morning, this is Jonathan Small, host and producer of All About You, and this program is broadcast every single week at AccessTV.org studios in downtown Hartford. And this show is designed to give a guest a chance to give their life story. This morning I have a former mayor of New Britain. He is currently the president of the Greater Chamber of Commerce in New Britain. My guest this morning is Timothy Stewart. Good morning, Tim. How you doing?
Good morning, Jonathan. How are you?
I'm doing all right, and you?
Good. Very good.
Tim, you was born and raised, I believe, in New Britain, Connecticut. You've been a lifelong Connecticut resident.
That's correct.
And you currently are the president of the Greater New Britain Chamber of Commerce.
That's correct.
You were mayor in New Britain. What made you decide that you wanted to become mayor of New Britain?
Somewhat accidental. My career in politics kind of was somewhat of an accident for me. I was engaged in the community in a lot of different venues. Number one, I was a city employee. I worked for the fire department for 20 years. Mm-hmm. I was a fire marshal. I was involved in a lot of community-wide activities, Christmas in April, YMCA, YWCA, all kinds of agencies throughout the city. And somebody had suggested to me at one time, who was a previous mayor, she was the first female mayor, Mayor Bogoslawski, that you probably should run for something, Tim, because you know enough people. I coached baseball for a long time too, so you know when you get involved in sports in your community, you get to have a lot of interaction with a lot of different people. Mm-hmm. Thought about it, and there was some politics in my family. At some, we had some elected officials in the family, and I said I might as well. So I ran for school board first because I had young kids. Mm-hmm. I was a top vote getter when I ran for school board, and then 4 years after that, I ran for city council and received the most votes on my side. Did 2 terms of city council, and we had a void in an election for somebody to run for mayor from the Republican ticket, and we had just experienced probably the largest tax increase in many people's history in the city, and it was largely due to revaluation, but more so a reluctance on the part of the administration to stem the tide, if you will, on the hurt to people. And I stepped up and I ran and I beat a 4-term incumbent Democratic mayor, and I served 8 years.
Now, Timothy, what year actually did you become mayor of
2003 to 2011, and I left after 4 terms because I knew it was my time. I firmly believe in term limits. Okay. I really do think that they're probably the only thing that will solve many of our political woes and issues in this community, not just our communities, but state and federal government. But they only exist in generally one office in the country, and that's for president. And that's really unfortunate because I think at the local level, those are the most important elected offices for anybody in any community. And you get people that serve their 16, 18, 20 years. For what reason? Mm-hmm. You know, what, to get a pension? I mean, what are you still doing that? Because you love your community? No, it's because you can't let it go. Mm-hmm. That's the problem. And people need to be forced to let it go and let other people serve. And that was the original intent of our Constitution in this country, too, is to make people turn it over. And they don't. And it's really unfortunate.
Well, Timmy, what about if the residents like the job that your current administration is doing and they feel that person is doing a good job? Do you still have an issue with somebody staying?
I do. I still do. I still think that there's no way that somebody who is a public servant, okay, that serves at the will of the people, should get a pension out of it. Mm-hmm. I don't agree. I really don't. Now, mind you, I was a public servant in another form, a paid public servant as a firefighter, and I received a pension from the city of New Britain, but that's because I did my time there as a paid public servant. Mm. I don't believe you should be paid to be an elected official, and I think what you'd see if you didn't pay some people, you'd get a whole different class of people that would do that stuff, because some people really do it for the money. Mm-hmm. It's sad.
Okay. Well, let me get a little bit about your city of
Yeah.
New Britain. I know you say you were elected in 2003, but you were born and raised in New Britain, and you've seen a lot of changes that has taken place in New Britain. On an economic scale, how has New Britain really changed from the time that you were growing up towards where it is now?
Pretty major. We had several really large manufacturing companies in the community. We had, going back to the 40s and 50s, Landers Ferry and Clark, Russell Irwin Factory. These places, Stanley Works, Fafner Bearings, these guys, New Britain Machine, there was probably 60,000 jobs there for people, which was the reason for the large migration of some of the ethnic communities to New Britain. Mostly the Polish folks came here because they knew when they came, they'd get a job. And New Britain was deeply rooted in its different ethnic neighborhoods, which were surrounded by their churches. So, on North Street, you would have St. Anne's Church, was largely Italian, and that whole population in that general area was all Italian. You go up to Broad Street, and Broad Street, which is largely a Polish neighborhood, Sacred Heart Church is there, and everybody who lived around there was Polish. And same thing with Holy Cross. So you had Ukrainian churches, you had French churches, German churches, and you had those pockets of population all over our community. And many of those people worked in these factories. And they not only worked there, their kids worked there, their relatives worked there, and they all lived in the same houses. They would have a 3-family tenement, and it'd be housed with an entire family. So today it's changed significantly because those houses they're no longer housing these families with their kids living on the next floor, or their grandmother on the 3rd floor, or what have you, how it used to be back in the 50s and 60s. That's no longer the case today. Much of it is largely rental property where the landlords are generally not local. So that's changed. That's a significant change in the population of the community, and also many of those jobs in those factories left. And when they left a void in the community too. What supplemented that was really nothing substantive. We've tried over the years to bring in companies like Celebration Foods with 300 jobs. We've got Polymer Precision up on by Slater Road, which is huge. But your largest employers today in the community are the institutions. They're the hospitals, and they're the colleges. And the city. So that wasn't the case, 40 years ago, and it is today.
Well, also you mentioned that New Britain had about 60,000 jobs at one point. I mean, how many total jobs that you think exist now in the city of New Britain?
New Britain largely, I would say today that small to mid-sized manufacturing is probably the largest employment base in our community, and people don't even realize it because they don't see all these companies, but they're there. There's quite a large base of that in New Britain, but still the institutions are where most people are getting work. And CCSU, I believe, is our largest employer in the city, which is the state of Connecticut. The hospitals are right up there too. So you've got CCSU, Hospital of Central Connecticut, which is Hartford Healthcare, and Hospital for Special Care is your 3 largest employers in the city. So, the focus has gone from pretty much manufacturing in our community over to more of a medical career type large employer group in the city.
Well, Timothy, has that created a lot of additional poverty? I know your poverty rate in New Britain is extremely high.
His unemployment's probably 11.5%, I think, in New Britain, somewhere in that area, which is much larger than the state average. And that's largely because we have a lot of affordable housing in the city, and that's what you find in urban areas. You find more affordable housing, which attracts more people of lower income levels. So what happens is some of that gets subsidized. So you'll have a lot of people in a community that may be on Section 8 vouchers. We had a lot of public housing in our city, just like Hartford did, and Hartford did some rehab, rebuilding. We did the same thing. I took down a public housing complex. Actually, part of some legislation we had passed back when I was mayor allowed the city to purchase Pinnacle Heights, which was 275 units, which got torn down and that's an industrial park. We were able to keep that for economic development. The other ones got rehabbed, and there's a groundbreaking coming up, I think. Well, it's already, they're done. People are living in there, but there's a ribbon cutting, I think, in another week or so, done by a private contractor through Conover Residential, who did a very nice job in rebuilding that. So it changed the look of things. We'll see how it pans out in the end. I think with a private company running it, it'll be much more efficient than our housing authority, which kind of ran it into the ground for many years.
Mm-hmm. Now, New Britain has a strong mayor form of government.
That's correct. Strong mayor, city council is a legislative body. Mayor serves 2-year terms. Some have always wanted it to go to 4, and we weren't willing to do that because if you got a bad mayor like we had in the last term, you got to endure that for 4 years, and the damage could be tremendous. And believe me, the 2 years of damage this guy caused is really almost impossible to overcome. So, 4 years is a long time. Some towns have done it. But the only way I would favor a 4-year term for a mayor is if you had a term limit on it. 2 terms, you got to get out. Nobody says you can't come back after you leave, but 2 terms in a row should be the most. Because if you can't affect your programs and your vision in 8 years, you don't belong there.
Well, currently you have your daughter, Erin Stewart, who is the mayor of New Britain, and you would say she took over a city that's kind of left, because you said the former mayor kind of left it in bad shape. So
absolutely. Yeah, she had a huge financial crisis. While he spent 2 years blaming me for his inability to balance a budget or to get a grip on things in the community, he left her with a tremendous financial gap. They basically added $40 million to a budget without increasing revenues anywhere. You can increase them on paper and show that a parking garage is going to go from $500,000 to $1 million, but you have to be able to justify it. And there was no justification for what he did. Made a tremendous amount of financial missteps over 2 years, and she was forced to raise taxes this year in order to accommodate some of the changes. But in the end, the only solution really for cities and towns is to decrease the size of government, because you just can't keep spending this kind of money in raising people's taxes. You're going to drive them right out of your marketplace.
Well, Timmy, currently you're the president of the Greater New Britain Chamber of Commerce. That also consists of Berlin, Connecticut.
Correct.
And Berlin is a lot different than New Britain when you look at
Very
the
much.
social.
It's so much more suburban than New Britain. The commonality between our communities is, number one, the Rockcats issue. Rockcats actually sits in Berlin, but is in New Britain Stadium. But the community is filled with many people that are ex-New Britain people.
Okay.
Yeah.
People that have kind of moved up the social economic ladder.
Well, they think they have. They think they've gone and made it and moved to Berlin, but in reality, many of them still have family and friends and and they still come back to New Britain all the time. That's the unique thing about New Britain. New Britain has a large base of community-wide support from people, that support so many different organizations like our museum, our YMCA, and our social service groups. That come back to town that used to live there, so it's really good.
Now, your job as the president of the Greater New Britain Chamber of Commerce, what does that actually consist of?
We're basically a networking group for the business community. I'm basically the chief business advocate for the businesses that are members of our organization. So, when people have issues with the city or something, or even the state, they call me and ask, hey, we need to get this done. How do I get it done? People want to do building projects. They want to expand their businesses. They're looking for money for this, that, or the other thing. They come see me, and I show them how to get it done. So I've got a pretty wide network of things that I've been involved with over the years. It's been beneficial to my membership. But largely, we're there to support each other. So we try to keep our business between a lot of our members and network that way, and that's been a real positive thing. So it's a slow-moving process. Chambers are largely, organizations that try to grow your base. So, my job really is to support the city in any way that I can. And it's nice for me to do that. I was integrally involved in this Costco project that just broke ground a few weeks ago. That took several years to get off the table. I was doing negotiations for the mayor on her behalf with them, because that was my project.
Now, you have to be obviously concerned of the state government because pretty much this up and coming election, cities like New Britain rely heavily on state aid.
That's correct.
And you got to obviously work with the governor. You have to work with the legislative body. Do you feel the process is working out pretty smoothly that you have?
No, our legislative group in this that represents New Britain is very partisan. They don't care for Republicans. They never did. They could say they work in a partisan manner all they want, but in the end, never. I've never seen it. They always tout, bringing more dollars back into the city, but formula-driven money is formula-driven money. You didn't do anything to get it. The formula says you're going to get X number of dollars more in your education budget, so they stand up there and say, look what I got. You didn't get anything. The state gave it to us because it was basically formula-driven. So, it's a difficult thing. I wish they could work more closely together with people regardless of their parties, but unfortunately a lot of people can't see beyond the end of their nose.
Well, one quick question before we take our break.
Yeah.
The current election for governor, do you think this is a real critical election that's up and coming?
Absolutely. Yeah, no question about it. The present governor has basically taken the position that, more government and government intrusion into our lives is good. And, for those people that have that philosophy, they support him. Many of us don't. And don't think that more taxes and more money out of my pocket is a good place, or treating businesses like they're second-class citizens is a good way to go about growing your state. We look at Connecticut and we see how many places we are ranked dead last, in economic growth and all kinds of different areas, and people want to tout that as a positive. I certainly don't. So there's definitely a need for change, and I think it's coming.
Well, are those rankings really always accurate and valid?
Absolutely.
That you always see these
no
rankings
question about it. What they do is some of these independent and impartial organizations will come in and attempt to do things in states and say, okay, what's the process to go from A to B? I want to start a business. How do I get there? And they'll do it and see what it takes, and then compare from state to state. And government doesn't work very fast. It never had, never will be, because people make careers out of things like pushing paper.
Okay.
So, the question really is, how big does your state government really need to be? How efficient can it be? And should it work like a business? And many people say no, but it really should. And I think that's where philosophies differ from Democrat to Republican.
Okay. Well, Timmy, so we up on our first break. Yeah. Let's come back and get into a little bit about this stadium that's being proposed here in downtown Hartford and get your views on that. This is Jonathan Small. I'm hosting All About You this morning with my guest, President of the Greater New Britain Chamber of Commerce, Timothy Stewart, and we'll be right back very shortly. Thank you. Yes, again, this is Jonathan Small hosting All About You this morning with my guest, the President of the Greater New Britain Chamber of Commerce, Timothy Stewart, and we're going to continue back with our conversation. To me, this Rock Cats development proposals and deals of having a stadium being brought to the capital city of Hartford. Obviously, it was a tremendous loss for New Britain. What's your whole take as a former mayor of New Britain about the benefits of having a minor league baseball team in your city?
It created somewhat of an identity for our community. You know, don't forget we had been, minor league baseball has been in New Britain since 1983. So for it to pack up and leave our community is a tremendous blow because the Rockcats have been involved in our community, and the previous ownership made it a point to include that team in a lot of different aspects of life in our community. So for that, the way it transpired, I think, was the most difficult thing to absorb. Not just for me as a former mayor, but from a guy who supported the team, who negotiated the contracts to keep them here, and dealt with them on a daily basis. It's pretty hurtful the way that they handled this thing, and in a way, it's hard to blame the ownership because their rationale for looking elsewhere was rooted in miscommunication from the city and some issues with the field and the team and the contract that weren't being addressed by the previous administration. Now, that didn't happen under me. That happened after I left, and there was a lot of support for that theory. However, they weren't major issues that they could have been overcome quite easily. So for them to bail in the way they did and the way that Mayor Segura handled it, that's, to me, unforgivable. It's a horrible way to treat a community that's given you so much in a contract that basically is second to none in the Eastern League. They pay virtually nothing to be there, and they make a ton of money in this operation, and they have over time. Unfortunately, this new ownership group paid way too much money for that thing. The other guys are laughing all the way to the bank, obviously, because they made a ton of money on this thing. But, the overall bigger picture here in Hartford, does Hartford deserve a baseball stadium? I know Mayor Mike wanted one a long time ago. Right. They tried for many years to get it, but the marketplace just doesn't demand it. And the location and the proposal that they have before them, I don't think it works, quite frankly. If you look at the figures and the facts in that contract that they're proposing to them, and they're going to unveil that thing, I think, tonight, the finances do not work for the city of Hartford. No way. And I don't think your taxpayers here are going to ratify that, because it's just going to add another burden to them. And that location, your access is going to be totally complicated to get to that stadium, especially given the fact that you've got two major interstates adjacent to that thing. Sounds good. Traffic volumes are great. How do you get on and off there? You have backups on that highway forever, if they think they're going to get the support they're going to get. I don't see it. I mean, we've had up to 350, close to 400,000 people a year at our stadium. Our stadium holds close to 7,000 people. They want to make this 9,000. I don't see the people that come to New Britain because of its convenience and its location. Many of those people are not coming here. So I don't know where they're going to draw their people from.
Well, you don't see people from the greater Hartford area, like West Hartford, Bloomfield, Windsor,
absolutely
being interested?
Not. Nobody wants to come into downtown Hartford at 5 o'clock at night and go to a baseball game and then fight the traffic. In New Britain, the only traffic you're fighting is to get a parking space when you're pulling into the stadium. So it's a very different dynamic. And one of the things that we lack in New Britain, I think to keep the team there, but I think there's possibilities, and I think the door is still open for it, is development around that stadium. Hartford's proposing to do development around the stadium, but don't forget, one of those big developments is a municipal building. City's got to pay for that.
Okay.
You want to invest $120 million into a municipal building, and your leases that you pay all over the other parts of the city are going to pay for the bond to do that? Listen, adding more money to your bonded indebtedness as a community that's already up to its ears in bonds is not a great thing to do. And I know there's many people in the community, especially in the elected positions, that are really not that keen on doing that and growing your indebtedness to the levels that this is going to take it. So honestly, I don't see it from a financial perspective. It may sound sexy, bring a baseball team to your community. Yeah, I can show you a dozen studies that say it's not going to work. And
But tell me, how did you make it work in New Britain? Now, what was the difference between having it in New Britain where it worked and not wanting to, or not having it in Hartford?
first of all, it's not in downtown.
Okay.
It's not in the downtown, and it's not close to the downtown. The highway access to this is pretty easy. You come right off of Route 9, you drive through a light, and you're in the parking lot.
Okay.
So it's a very simple access to get here, to the New Britain Stadium. New Britain Stadium is more of a family-friendly environment, and they're trying to make this stadium here a corporate environment.
Okay.
Very, very different thing, which means that they've got to get corporate buy-in for support for that stadium, which means you're going to have to get Travelers, Aetna, and all these large insurance companies to come in and step up. And we didn't have to do that in New Britain. We had enough smaller businesses to support them that made them profitable, and we still had the fan base annually that even. You know what the best thing about the experience in New Britain is, and people have no idea. I was always amazed at Bill Dowling, who was a former general manager for many, many years of the team, how he could create an experience for people that when they left the game, if you asked them who won, most of them couldn't tell you.
Okay.
They couldn't tell you because they didn't care.
All right.
They came with their kids and their family because it was an easy place to get to. This is not going to be easy. And putting a Hooker Brewery next to it, or building a municipal building in there, is going to guarantee what? More cost for the city of Hartford, pretty much. So, we never made money on that stadium, and we didn't really try to. We tried to make it break even, but it still cost us money over years to bond for that thing. It was all paid off when they built the new stadium. But remember, they came from Bristol to go to New Britain, and it's not in a downtown area, and that there's no magic bullet for rejuvenating your community, especially downtown, with professional sports. You think Hartford would have learned their lesson with the Patriots, but obviously not.
Well, Timothy, what about the Hartford Whalers when they used to be downtown? That's not that far from this proposed
Absolutely
site.
not.
And didn't that work out pretty well for a time
period?
period?
Didn't, because they got sold. When Rossimondo bought I think that was his name, when he bought the team, he was hell-bent on getting it out of here. And he didn't waste any time. Carmanos was his name. And he took it to Carolina.
Right.
And he built a huge stadium for him down there. They ended up winning the Stanley Cup, but look at the stadium. They still only get 10,000 people in a game. You got 60,000 people stadium, and it's empty, virtually empty. At least in Hartford had a decent fan base and a loyal fan base, and it took a lot of years to develop that.
Right.
Lots of years to develop that. So, these things just don't materialize overnight. And hockey, is hockey a big draw in this community, in this area? Not so. Go to a Wolfpack game. There's not too many people there.
Okay.
So I don't see the baseball as being some sort of panacea for development or rebuilding, north end of Hartford. I just don't see it.
Well, you had similar areas in New Britain. That's because New Britain is an urban city, so obviously you had to have some issues in certain areas of New Britain.
Absolutely.
How, as a former mayor, would you say you would go towards trying to redevelop the capital city? Because the capital city is very important for our state.
It is, and your biggest tenant probably in Hartford is the insurance companies, which continue to stay here. But they're slowly easing their ways out. But the state of Connecticut continues to pump money. So for those that think that there's not going to be any support from the state nor the city to build this complex, they're smoking something, because there has to be. There's no question about it. Just in order to get the infrastructure developed, there's going to be an unbelievable amount of permitting that has to go on through the state of Connecticut, through DOT. And you can guarantee that if there's a city building in there, you're going to have to bond for it. And no developer is going to put up his own money. Nobody worth their salt, unless they've got guarantees on that development. Okay, that guarantee means city, state money, and support to make this thing work financially. Because why would you put money up to lose it? What are you going to do when you build a 9,000-seat stadium? You have no team, number one, yet, because the Minnesota Twins have just said that they're you know, they're iffy on renewing the contract because of what these guys have done and the way they've handled it. So that's good to hear, but you know, we don't want to lose them in New Britain either. So they either are negotiating with another team already, or you know, I don't know. It's kind of interesting.
Well, Timmy, you don't see anything else that stadium can be utilized for beyond just having minor league baseball throughout the spring and summertime?
Not to generate income.
Okay.
What else are you gonna? What are you gonna put in there? You know, high school stuff. You know, don't get me wrong. I mean, Hartford could use some quality field for high school, maybe even some college play. You know, Trinity baseball or something can probably play there. You know, but that doesn't generate enough income to pay off the debt service on a project like that. So, you know, we didn't even generate enough income to pay off our debt service on that thing. So, you know, the city took a loss in that for a lot of years. But don't forget, too, you've got unions, you've got contracts, you've got city workers, you got all that stuff that gets intertwined into here. And believe me, it creates more of a problem than a solution in the end. So, you know, I honestly, I don't see it working. I really don't. And you know, I wish them well, but, you know, at the expense of another community, that's not the way to go about economic development, you know, by hurting in one community to help another. And unfortunately, in Connecticut, home rule, when they changed it way back when, that's what's created this mess. It's created a mess in our schools. It's created a competition among cities and towns, 169 cities and towns vying for the same companies all the time. You know, who's going to give them the biggest incentive to come? We shouldn't be fighting that way. And that's just the nature of state government.
Well, Timmy, you as the president of the Greater New Britain Chamber of Commerce and a lifelong Connecticut resident, you have to be obviously concerned with the direction that Connecticut is going into.
No question.
And who do you think, I mean, obviously you might be in favor of one governor over the current governor that, you know, if the Republican governor or the Republican candidate gets elected, let's just say Tom Foley, you know, straight out. Do you believe he could do a lot different and better job than our current
Absolutely.
governor?
You know, first of all, somebody with a good handle on business principles and practices probably is better suited to handle the mess that we're facing in Connecticut than, you know, somebody who just wants to continue to grow things at the government level. So, yeah, I do think that Tom can be a savior for this state. You know, number one, he's already proposed to get rid of certain business taxes and things like that are onerous to businesses and creating businesses in our state. I mean, as a small business owner myself, I end up having to pay just a $250 fee every year just for the right to own a business in this state. Why? Why? Just so the state can take my money? They take your taxes anyways.
Right.
And so there's a lot of bureaucratic nonsense, I think, that goes on there. And while they keep saying, oh, we're changing things, we're changing processes, we're eliminating red tape, that's baloney. Call the state up and try to do something and tell me how long it takes you. It's ridiculous. And that's largely because we have a workforce that has grown on itself and created jobs within itself in different agencies in the state of Connecticut. And you really need to take a hard look at that and make the changes where necessary, because, you know, the state of Connecticut shouldn't be its largest employer.
Well, Tim, I know the state has gone through some tremendous challenges, but there was a report that came out in the Hartford Current this morning that Fairfield County still seems to be growing, particularly Stamford.
Yep.
Now, how does an area like that in the state of Connecticut seems to grow despite all of these issues and problems in other areas?
Proximity to New York.
Okay.
It's pretty simple. Most people don't want to be in downtown New York because the costs of being there are onerous to their business. So what do? They come across the border to Connecticut where it's even cheaper, believe it or not. So, I mean, go try to pay a rent in New York City.
Right.
It's actually cheaper in Connecticut, and we're still expensive. So the proximity and the transportation initiative is there to be able to get them from in and out of the city rather quickly. So, you know, plus, don't forget, Governor's a Stamford guy. He's dumped a lot of money into Stamford and pushed some companies into there, too. So, you know, that obviously is a little bit of
But would you say he did an excellent job as the former mayor of Stamford? Because a lot of businesses.
I don't know much about Stamford, to be honest with you,
Okay.
besides the fact that I drive through it every once in a while on a train.
Okay.
But you know, it's got a Yukon campus and it's downtown. Like I said, it's proximity. You know, Fairfield County still is probably the richest county in the country. Okay, per cap. Seriously, it is.
Yes.
I mean, if you look at the folks that live there and the income that they make, it's tremendous. But they are losing people too, and
Right.
people are going to Florida. They're going to other states like South Carolina where there's no tax. Because you know, they're giving so much money back to the state of Connecticut by living here, just for the pleasure of living here. So you're seeing a lot of changes out that way too. So yeah, it's still a rich county, but you know, it can't get any better, I don't think.
And one last question, because we're just about out of time.
Yep.
Do you think this stadium, in your opinion, is actually going to really happen here in Hartford, or you think it's going to happen some other place throughout our state? Or you just, I mean, what's your views of where you think this goes?
I don't think it's going to happen. I really don't think. I mean, if somebody does a real hard financial look at what this proposal looks like, I think you're going to quickly find out that, you know, they can propose all the revenues they want to say that we're going to get naming rights revenue for the stadium. How are you going to generate all that kind of annual income on a naming rights issue when you still have a bond to pay off? You got a city building you're building on there. The guy that's going to be building the Hooker Brewery, you think he's doing it on his own nickel? he'll be knocking on DCD door down the street on Hudson Street to try to get some money to make that happen too. So these people aren't going to be coming without their hands out. And the fellow that's in charge of the whole development is a former state representative from Essex. Who knows the state system pretty well, and you can guarantee that that he'll be looking for some state money too, even though the governor is already coming out and said, "Oh, we're not involved in this thing at all." Baloney.
Well, unfortunately, we have to leave it maybe on a negative.
That's okay.
But honestly, honest. I mean, that's your honest opinion on how honest.
I just don't
facts.
think. I don't think it'll happen.
You don't think it's going to happen?
No.
Okay.
No, I think they're going to have to come back to New Britain and say, "Listen, you know, they've already." Made overtures to the mayor, and they sat down once, paid their tax bill that they refused to pay, and said, you know, we got to talk again about next year. But they're already trying to market their packages, their advertising packages and ticket sales for a 2-year period, one in New Britain, one in Hartford. So I think the biggest impediment to Hartford is time frame.
Okay.
No way.
No way.
Impossible. Unless you're working 24/7, 365. Impossible. And just the delays alone it's impossible.
And you didn't have to go through all this when you was mayor with the Rockettes coming.
No, we built that stadium a long time ago. I mean, we actually had a smaller stadium, and in order to accommodate them at the time, Joe Buzis, who was the owner, said, listen, I'm going to look elsewhere unless you get me some good facilities. The city said, let's take a look at what we can do. And we had the space. And they built the 7,000-seat stadium, which is one of the nicest stadiums in the Eastern League.
Okay.
So,
well, let's leave it on that note.
That's fine.
And I had enjoyed having you on this
Jonathan,
morning,
thank
Timothy.
you.
No
Okay,
problem.
Appreciate it.
This is Jonathan Small. I had enjoyed hosting All About You this morning with my guest, President of the Greater New Britain Chamber of Commerce, Timothy Stewart. And like I say, this network is really growing. It's moving in the right direction. There's a lot of great programs that you can watch throughout the week on accesstv.org. And as I also say every single week to people out there, have a very blessed day and keep the faith. Thank you.